Yeah, I think it's also in a way because we share the same, also even terminology, even though we use different words, but actually we think about the same phenomena. Let's say for us, what we discuss all week is really where this collective behavior, this emergent behavior comes from, how we can see that, how we can notice. Where the group, indeed, like you state here, it behaves somewhat different than the individual parts. And that's exactly the discussion we're having in the lab. So when do the parts become more than that, and when do new features emerge? This is the whole discussion in the lab, and I found it was interesting because you very naturally brought that up, that this is what you're doing with your team in a way.
Exactly, especially with Becoming, a previous piece we worked on, which was very much about organisms and group behavior. So it was the first piece that I dedicated to how the group functions and communicates. So we started with the idea of the skin and communicating through touch and through the neighbor. So we had the idea that we created communication tools, let's say, or we developed tools or tasks for the dancers to communicate with their neighbor through touch, and through that observing what's created as a whole, what could potentially be created as a whole. So from there, I think now we're finding more and more specific elements of, let's say, concepts or ideas you work with that could actually give us, in a way, more understanding of what we were doing and what could we do from there. Like the idea is to expand our knowledge of what we already do, thanks to you, in a way.
So for instance, for us, what we do a lot now in the lab, that we kind of change perspective. So we have a group behavior in front of us, and then we change perspective on that. You know, do we zoom in and look, or do we zoom out, and do we look from that side or from this side? And I thought this, for instance, was also, you brought up when you also discussed how you want to think about projecting the scene, you know, from which direction, and maybe also with Bogomir. So I thought that could be extremely interesting. So that goes into the direction group behavior versus individual behavior. And I really liked your, you know, if you make the big arch back to our first discussion, where you also talked about society and also politics, and you know, exactly. I think that's interesting to see that you might see some group behavior, but does it match what the individuals do or think or support, or who knows, you know? And I find it striking that you can go as basic as physics, and you have the same kind of, you know, a bit misleading perception of what you are seeing, actually.
We could replicate these experiments to see physically what happens. I mean, I find it interesting because even you as a scientist, you're trying to explain this apparently complex situation that happens between cells or behavior, but then you tell us it's like the Mexican wave. It's actually, we're back into humans doing some kind of physical interaction, some kind of dance. So I think, yeah, it's interesting how eventually we go back to the human scale to try to understand this microscopic scale.
One of them is that they change behavior. So individually, they're all sitting there, nothing. You put them together and they make these waves. But the second aspect that we don't discuss so much is, you know, the waves, they start somewhere.
You never know when, where it's going to start. Or...
Exactly. So they try to figure out, where do the waves start? So who is the pacemaker here? Is there one? Yeah, he was again the pacemaker. See? So you might think that this beat is somehow a leader. You call them a leader. But Ken is sure that this beat is not different than any other beat. See, so it's the position that makes him the leader.
When we speak about science and we imagine bodies in space, and we talk about also oscillations between cells, which is the feedback between cells, and how do they communicate and how do they kind of self-organize to create something, to create patterns, to create eventually organs or bones. So we're looking at that kind of what is the development of individual cells coordinating and working together. And we're translating that into a kind of choreographic study and choreographic work, but there is also an emotional depth there is also a performative experience that the dancers are going through, where they are also opening something that has to do with themselves, with their emotions, with their lives.
You feel different and you dance different if you are very close to someone or if you're far away. So yeah, working with proximity is definitely a tool. Also working with body language and eye contact and facial expressions. On an emotional level, you can't help but be affected by the others if they are feeling or experiencing something, or they reach a heightened state physically that also affects you emotionally. And that's what we're working on, like opening those pathways so that you can feel on an intuitive level.
Also, when we think of dance, even like when I think of dance, and sometimes we talk about what people expect from dance. We had also, when we presented Becoming in the Researchers' Night, some scientists were expecting dance to function in a certain way, which is the synchronized dance, moving together at the same time. But when we speak about like Becoming also, which was very much about these individuals triggering something together as a group, and eventually some kind of flow started emerging in the group, but they were not moving at the same time. So, and I guess that could be this idea of being synchronous, of building relations, temporal relations.
So synchronous versus synchronized.
Yes.
So for instance, you could say, let's imagine you look again from the top. We see from the top two what looks synchronous behaviors, and you wonder, is it synchronous or synchronized? Yeah. How would you probe that? Yeah. What would you do actually?
I'm just imagining that, so say if the dancers were listening to the same music, but they're blindfolded, you say like they point to the right if something says, like if they hear this music, they point to the left if they hear another music. They will synchronize to the music because they're hearing it. But between dancers, since they don't see each other, they will appear synchronized, but in fact they're actually just synchronous.
I remember a discussion with a scientist from another field of research. Maybe we come to that at the end, the human oscillation, the circadian clock, the day and night rhythm is controlled by cellular clocks that we have in the body. And that is called a clock. And people have said for decades that this has to be very precise. The time has to be very precise. It has to be 24 hours. And of course we need that. And there, if you talk to these people, an oscillation equals a clock, equals time, not timing.
If the sun rises when it's morning, I will wake up. But then if the sun rises at 10 and I'm already awake, it wouldn't give me like a very drastic response, like very roughly. So say if the sun, if that light will shine when it's 1 a.m., like it will annoy me. But then when it shines when it's 10 a.m., it wouldn't annoy me as much as when it did like during the nighttime. So that's pretty much like the phase response curve. So depending on the oscillation,
like the perturbation would cause a different response. Considering like where I am in my cycle.
Music influences dancers, that's clear. You put a rhythm, you sustain that, and somehow the dancer becomes entrained with that rhythm, right? And there is some kind of oscillation or pace that changes in the dancers' bodies. You take the music right away, and you cannot expect that. I mean, there is some resonance, some echo of that, like that the affection is still there.
I see the way you use it.
Or there is an affection there that continues.
Some sort of an inertia, kind of a more like that. I see. Yeah, I think we use resonance slightly different than in that sense, but I see what you mean. So you take it away, and it takes a while.
Exactly, there is something there that remains. The affection is still there, visible. Like the idea of visualizing the effect of this entrainment. Once you take what was causing it, so there's a cause and effect, right? But then you take the cause, and somehow the effect is still there.
But I think
visible.
But I think it's good to bring up resonance, because I think also for the general public, let's say, this is a striking example where the interaction between these rhythmic objects can have a very drastic effect. Like this. So it's actually interesting. Sometimes we forget to mention it. So amplitude, that would be the magnitude, right? So that would be what? That would be like how loud the loudness of a tone, right? And we usually discuss only the effect on rhythm. So what we call the phase, the peak and the trough, and in between, that's just phase. Where are you on your oscillation? Are you pushed a bit to the left or to the right? But we don't discuss so much if we change the magnitude of it. You see? Whereas in resonance, there is this effect. So there's the effect that when they come together, you could increase the amplitude. And then you have massive oscillations.
That meeting in May with the dancers, and we have these explanations, we can also, Leonardo and I think, start making connections with dance, with body. When we talk about temperature, I think it's something definitely interesting for us, because sensing is going to come in.
The thought was really remarkable, this change of perspective. So at some point you didn't actually know, what are you looking, is that the real or is it on stage? And that was really well done. And that really, also because of our discussions, reminded me of what we were saying. We try to change perspective, we use microscopes. The top view really reminded me of looking at it with a microscope, not because of the micro, but because of the perspective actually. Some parts of it were synchronous, without much of a connection, and then the connection grew, and you could see that they were looking at each other, they were influencing each other, trying to keep distance, which is maybe the particular thing of these days. I think what people will see immediately is the flow and also the energy that is remarkable, so there's constant movement, constant flow. And also this overlapping rhythms, many oscillations happening at the same time.